So let's get to the bass. I already singled this one and bypassed all the effects, so the bass on its own sounds something like this. Okay, first thing you notice is probably, the bass sounds pretty cool and decent and usable. And second thing you notice is it's very dynamic. That means the volume is going up and down and up and down. As you can see, some parts are more quiet than the other parts. That's because of the way you pluck the strings now and then. So first thing we do is even this out, because in heavy metal we want the bass to be more consistent and not so wobbling around in the space somewhere. So as you can see, first thing I actually always do is apply a gate. How to apply a gate, I touched on this in the previous part. It's again just to clean up some gaps like in the part down here. Then compression. What you want to do is basically have a heavy compression going on so it's nicely everything evened out. But what I like to do is use two compressors. So the first one, as you can see, has a harder ratio, almost 6:1. A fast attack of just a couple of milliseconds and a fast release. And then I apply the threshold, so it's just compressing the louder peaks in here. So as we turn this on and you look at the meter, that's the compressing meter, you'll see it's only going down at the louder parts. So you see that's just a first evening out. Now I apply second compression. The attack is a bit slower, about 20 milliseconds. Release again very fast. Ratio also a bit harder, about 4:1 in that area. And then I apply the threshold, so it's constantly compressing. And then you'll notice everything is nicely evened out. So I turn those two off again first, and then listen to the part down here that's most dynamic in this riff. Okay, now I turn both on and you'll notice it's very nicely evenly out. Okay, beautiful. Now second thing again that we apply is an EQ. Again, my approach to EQ, as always, first I cut out stuff, then I boost stuff. So first thing I cut is the sub bass section to get rid of the very low sub rumbling stuff. Also, many people just put a peak in here that looks something like this, around 50 or 60 hertz, definitely at the same spot where you boost the kick drum. So those two don't interfere. But I just like to put a cut directly in there, so I also get rid of the very low rumbling down there. It's not really the rumbling. We do want rumbling, but we want to get rid of the wobbling. You know, this very sub bass low stuff that can really mess up your whole mix. So I just cut it out that way. And as you probably recall in the part where I talk about my bass tones of the X3, I already took care of most of the very low sections. I cut it out with the X3 EQ, so I also don't need to cut out too much in this one now. In the high section here, also just a cut to get some control of some additional fizziness up there. And if you listen again now very closely, listen very closely and try to find a sort of ringing in there. Now you gotta listen very, very closely to actually hear this. This comes from some extra noise that is produced in the cable that's connecting my X3 live outputs to my line-in input. and that's why there's still a little bit of noise, and especially there's this one ringing tone in there that's coming out pretty nasty to me. And it's also just noticeable in the bass guitar, because the bass guitar does most of the stuff in the very low section, and it is also more clean, and that's why you hear this higher ringing more clearly out of it. That's why I also only apply such a notch on the bass, not on the guitars, on none of the guitars actually, because you don't hear it in there. But in the bass, it's a bit more noticeable, so I just cut this out with a notch, and I identified it to be at 3 kilohertz, pretty much exactly. So if I boost this now, you will probably hear it very good. So that's that. But again, this is just for my setup. It can be very different with yours. Okay, now the second EQ. Remember, I boost the kick drum at 50 Hz and at 100 Hz, the snare drum at 200 Hz, and the rhythm guitar at 250 Hz. So now we need to make sure we do not boost the bass guitar at any of those frequencies. Because if you boost 2 instruments at the same frequencies, you will end up in destruction. So I boost at 150 Hz, somewhere in between. Again, be pedantic with the low end, otherwise it will just mess up everything. Okay, and that's my bass guitar. And also I want to remind you, again, I boost and I cut in context of the mix. So usually I listen to the song and then I apply the cut and the boost so it sounds good. And then what you do at the end is apply the volume. So we turn the volume all the way down of the bass, listen to the song in itself, and then pull it back up until we find a good balance, as always. Okay, so this is how I go about it. Then next thing, very important, is editing your bass tracks. So we single this one for now again. Now listen very closely when it's switching from this recorded bass event to this recorded bass event. And listen closely what happens. Did you notice there was a very audible click? And now I'll show you where this comes from. There you see it. There's a nice step in the waveform. So what we need to do is cut both of these events so they meet at the same spot, as good as it goes. So for example, of course you need to turn off the snap function, then we turn this back, pull this forward, somewhere in there. Of course I already did this, so that's why I know there's a good spot for those two to meet. So again, to find such spots, you need to just look around back and forth with both of those so you can locate it. And as you listen to it again, you'll notice the clicking is gone. And that's how I do it with every single change of the events, to get rid of this clicking. I do not do this with the electric guitar, because again, the electric guitars are very distorted, so you don't hear this. Actually, it's not very noticeable. It's most noticeable in the bass guitar, as far as my experience goes. That's why I also only do it on the bass guitar. Okay. Now, another very, very useful tool and trick that you can apply on your bass is sidechain compressing it, and the compressor is being triggered by the kick drum. So how you would set this up is also fairly easy. So when you applied all the compression and the EQ already for your bass drum and it sounds very nicely, you can still apply another compressor at the end of everything. So dynamics compressor. And now in here you turn on the sidechain button. Now we put a ratio of about 3:1, put the threshold all the way up, a fast attack of just a couple of milliseconds, around 4 or 5, and a fast release. Okay, now we go here to the channel where our kick drum lies. We go to the send effect of this one. And here we choose this sidechain compression now that we have just put in. Turn it on and put the mix to 0. And now we play the kick drum and the bass only, and then we apply the threshold. So in case you haven't noticed what's going on right now, the bass guitar is being compressed. That means its volume is being lowered as soon as the kick drum hits in. And this is very useful because if your bass is very loud and heavy and rumbling, and the kick drum should be just the same way, really hitting hard, but somehow they are overshadowing each other, then this is a very useful tool, because every time the kick is coming in, the bass guitar is being put in its place a bit lower, so the kick has enough space to really come out and hit you in the face. So definitely take a look in this tool. I didn't apply it in this song because I actually like it the way it is now. Now there are still other options to mix your bass guitar, and I will show them to you now. Bam. Okay, you see I only did this for bass guitar now. I also just recorded a very stupid generic riff. And this also applies more for a tone that sounds something like this. So what we have here is a bass tone with only a bass amp simulation and a bass cap simulation on it. Nothing else, nothing fancy, no bass distortion pedal is being applied and whatnot. So what I do in this situation first would be putting an EQ that looks something like this, cutting out this whole mid section down here at about 600 Hertz. And then it very cleans up nicely all this boxiness going on in there. Okay, next thing you do is you copy this bass track to another audio channel, and in this one we will give it some wicked distortion, which is actually more for guitars, but still we are going to put it on the bass guitar, and then it's going to sound really ridiculous. So since there's going to be a lot of distortion, first thing to do is gate, noise gate. Again, I go into the premise, you already know how to apply a noise gate. So then what I do is I put an insert effect, namely the TSE 808. This is a free guitar distortion pedal simulation, and this gives very beautiful mid-range distortion and grind. Then I put in a TSE X50. I pulled out some of the pre-gain. Other than that, I do not change any settings. This is all freeware. Then I put in an impulse, anyone to your liking, and then some very important, again, EQing. Here I take out some or most of the low section and also the high fizziness, so we get more concentration on the mid-range grind in there. And this distorted bass channel sounds something like this now. And now you turn both channels on and it sounds something like this. Okay, now what I would do is I route both of these bass channels into one common group channel. As you can see here on the output, I pick group 1, which is here. I can also rename it to bass guitar So it's going to the bass guitar group channel, this one as well. And now on this group channel, you would apply the compression and the EQ settings I have shown you before. Now there's another easier way you can mix your bass guitars. If you work with the premise that you have this kind of basic bass guitar tone. Now what you can do to this is you insert a plugin, namely the TSE BOD, which stands for Bass Overdrive. And this is a very, very awesome plugin because it takes out all of this annoying mid-range section of the bass and applies some wicked grind to it, and it just sounds beautiful. Just listen to before and after. So this is also one option. And then again, behind this plugin, you would put some compression and DQing. So I hope this is enough information for you, and stick around for the next parts to come.